Well, good morning, everyone. Microphone. My name is Neil Levesque. I'm the Executive Director here at the New Hampshire Institute of Politics. I want to welcome you to the campus of Saint Anselm College. I know it was a little cold this morning, but unless you're from California, it wouldn't be a big deal. But a couple just quick things. We have a special relationship with the New England Council on this very special series. I know that someone in the room is signing eggs right now, just like President Bartlett did in the West Wing. So we're going to continue with that. But just a couple things. Just want to recognize, too, that we have a lot of members of the press here and a lot of great journalists in the room. And we do not honor journalists in this country as much as we should. And they're all here today. And so I just want to recognize them. So for the purposes of introduction, I want to introduce Jim Brett, CEO, New England Council. Jim.
Thank you very much, Neil. And we would be remiss, the New England Council, without thanking Neil and his extraordinary and dedicated team here at the Institute. What a great partnership that we have. And these events may look easy, but they're very difficult to put on, and we put on so many of them. But what a great partner to have, St. Anselm's, and in particular, Neil. I can't say enough. I would be remiss if I didn't also acknowledge the wonderful, wonderful sponsors that you see, the banners on the wall. They are the ones that make it possible to have these events. The breakfast events and luncheons that we have had over the years. They are such great corporate neighbors of New England. And if you see anyone representing the company, you should say thank you. Thank you for providing that wonderful service, an opportunity to meet the presidential candidates up close and to have an opportunity to meet them and to hear them and to ask questions. But only in New Hampshire are we able to do that, but it's possible because of the sponsors. So I just want to say thank you to all of them. 2019 has gotten off to a very, very busy start for the New England Council. This morning's breakfast is actually the first half of a double header today. We're headed up the road to the Bedford Village Inn after this breakfast for a congressional roundtable with the Congresswoman from the 2nd Congressional District here in New Hampshire, Annie Custer. Next Monday, February 25th, we will again be here at the Institute from another Californian who is considering a run for president, and that is Congressman Eric Swalwell. Later in the week, we'll head to Washington for a back-to-back Capitol conversation where we invite all the members of Congress from New England and all the United States senators from New England, not only speak in their districts and their state, but also speak in Washington to many of our members who have an office in Washington. And next week, we'll have Congressman Bill Keating speaking in Washington. And we'll also have Senator Ed Markey, who will also be speaking in Washington. And we'll kick off March with yet another busy week. We'll hear from Congressman Stephen Lynch of Boston. We'll head back to D.C. The following day on the 6th of March to hear from Congressman John Larson from Hartford, Connecticut. And then we'll wrap up the week again here at St. A's to hear another Politics and Eggs with the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Mayor Pete Buttigieg. Needless to say, I think we, in the last several weeks, have 17 events, which is extraordinary. And if you see the staff from the New England Council that is here, we gave a commercial to Neil. You should give a commercial to Larry Zabar and Pauline and Sean. They do a great job. If you're happy with your seat today, thank me. If you're not, Larry Zabar is over here. Pauline is over here. If you're really unhappy with your seating arrangement. I also want to thank the photographer. We did a nationwide search. My niece is the photographer who covers all these events. We believe in nationwide searches as long as they end the way we want. That's fine. But today we are honored to welcome one of the newest entries to the 2020 presidential field, and that is Senator Kamala Harris. And that Kamala is, I think, means lotus flower. Okay, all right. She's a native of Oakland, California, a graduate of Howard University and the University of California Hastings School of Law. She's launched what has been a very impressive career in public service as a prosecutor in the district attorney's office, soon graduating after law school. She later joined the San Francisco district attorney's office. She led the career criminal unit. 2003, she defeated a two-term incumbent to become the San Francisco's district attorney and was reelected in 2007. 2010, our guest speaker here this morning made history as the first African-American woman to be elected as California's Attorney General. In nearly 2 terms as AG, she led efforts to assist homeowners hit by the foreclosure crisis, to defend California's landmark climate change law, to protect the Affordable Care Act, and to ensure public safety and civil rights for all Californians. She made history again in 2016 when she was elected to the United States Senate, becoming only the second African-American woman and the first South Asian American to serve in the United States Senate. On Capitol Hill, she has been an outspoken voice for reforming our criminal justice system, ensuring access to health care, and supporting working families. I think it's safe to say throughout her career, our good friend has been a fearless advocate for the voiceless and the vulnerable, and a vocal and determined fighter on behalf of all people. Last month, she officially threw her hat in the ring, announcing her candidacy for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination. This is her first visit to the Granite State since that very, very significant announcement. And boy, are we honored that she has chosen politics and eggs as one of her first stops. Please join me in welcoming and giving a very warm New Hampshire politics and eggs welcome to the junior senator from the great state of California, the Honorable Senator Kamala Harris. Is that all right? All right. Okay. The rest is up to you now.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So at our table over here, Jim presented me with a basket of eggs, and as I was signing them, I said, well, I could poach these eggs, I could scramble these eggs. He said, just don't lay an egg. So I will try not to. But thank you for that very generous introduction, Jim. I appreciate it, and I'm honored to be here at this historic event, this breakfast. I've read about it, I've heard about eggs in politics, and to be here is really, it's an exciting moment, and I'm honored and humbled. And I want to thank the mayor for our time together. Where is she? Oh, right, of course, disoriented. For our time together and for your leadership. We had a great visit this morning, and I appreciate your leadership and the historic nature of your success. So thank you for that. Thank you. So this is my first official trip to New Hampshire as a candidate for President of the United States. And during our time here yesterday, I started the day having many interviews. And one of the first questions I was asked, and so I'm bringing this up because I just want to get this off the table. Do you plan on spending any time here? Are you going to compete here? So I just want to let everybody know, I plan on competing hard in New Hampshire. And I plan on doing well here. And it is very important to me that when we run this election and when we run our campaign specifically, that we not only are successful in terms of the intention to win, but frankly, the way that I will measure our success is not only that, but that at the end of this process, that we are relevant. And the only way, I think, to ensure that we will be relevant is to make sure that we are spending time with leaders and with folks who are informed, who love our country, who care about our country. It is important to me that I personally spend time in environments where I am being challenged and where I am listening as much, if not more, than I talk. And so I'm here to tell you I plan on spending a lot of time in your beautiful state, and I appreciate and thank you for the warm welcome that you've given me so far. So I'm going to share with you a couple of thoughts that I have about where we are, and then I'd really like to get into a group conversation and begin the question and answer part of this morning. But as Jim shared with you, I am a career prosecutor by most of my career. I was born in Oakland, California, a daughter of two parents who were graduate students at the University of California, Berkeley, and they met when they were active in the civil rights movement there. So my sister Maya and I, my sister Maya is here, we joke that we grew up surrounded by a bunch of adults who spent full-time marching and shouting about this thing called justice. And among the heroes, of course, of that civil rights movement were the lawyers. Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston, Constance Baker Motley, these individuals who understood the skill of the profession of law to translate the passion from the streets to the courtrooms of our country, and to do the work that we know must constantly be done of reminding folks of that great promise we articulated in 1776. We are all and should be treated as equals. So at a young age, I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And I went to Howard, as Jim shared with you. I went to UC Hastings. And right out of law school, I joined the Alameda County District Attorney's Office, which has a reputation of being one of the best in the country, in large part because years before, Earl Warren ran that office. And when I decided to become a prosecutor, there were many people that questioned that decision. You know, my sister, for example, went on to run the ACLU. But what I said then, and what I maintain today, after a career as a prosecutor, I was a courtroom trial lawyer. I prosecute everything, including homicide cases. I was the elected district attorney of a major city. I went on to be the attorney general of my state. What I maintain today after a career in law enforcement and as a prosecutor is this. The criminal justice system has such a profound and direct impact on the most vulnerable among us, and has a responsibility in the process of giving people safety to give them dignity. I also believe, having known the system from the inside, that there is a lot of room for reform of our criminal justice system, and we should be focused on that as well. And so of the many priorities that I have in this campaign, and if the voters will have me as the next president of the United States, one of them will be what we need to do to be smarter around what we're doing in the criminal justice system. So I'm happy to have a conversation about that and would enjoy a conversation about the details of that. I also believe very strongly that right now in our country, there are a lot of people who are very distrustful of our government and its institutions and its leaders. And we're going to have to deal with that as we go forward. And the thing about a relationship of trust, which I think we all know in our personal and our professional lives, is that the very nature of a relationship of trust is such that it is a reciprocal relationship. You give and you receive trust. And one of the most important ingredients in trust is truth. But there's a funny thing about truth. And as a room of leaders, we know this to be true. Funny thing about truth, which is speaking truth can often make people quite uncomfortable. And when you stand behind microphones like this and you're at a podium like this, there is an incentive that when we speak, the crowd will applaud and everyone will feel lovely and we'll sprinkle lovely dust all over the room and job will have been done. Speaking truth doesn't always accomplish that goal. But the other thing about speaking truth is this. Yes, people will walk away from that conversation saying, you know, I didn't particularly like what I had to hear. But they'll also walk away from that conversation knowing it was an honest conversation. And as we proceed in this campaign year, I believe it is critically important that as leaders we speak truth with the purpose of not offending or making people uncomfortable, but with the purpose of dealing with issues and inspiring trust among the people we serve. So, in that context, I'll mention a few issues that I think need to be spoken, and need to be spoken in a way that is about the truth. Let's talk about our economy. The economy in America today is not working for working people. And I'll tell you why I say that. I say that when I look at the data, the facts, that tell us that almost half of American families today cannot afford a $400 emergency unexpected expense. That $400 unexpected expense, be it that the car breaks down or a medical bill they didn't anticipate, will cause them to lose their footing, if not go into a financial spiral. That is a fact in America today. A fact in America today is that in 99% of the counties in the United States, if you are a minimum wage worker working full-time, you cannot afford market rate for a one-bedroom apartment. That is a fact in America today. So this discussion, from my perspective, is not about saying, you know, people who have worked hard and gained success should be vilified. I don't believe that. I applaud that. That's pursuit of the American dream. But I also recognize, and if we're going to have an honest conversation, we must all recognize that the rules aren't applying equally to all people in our country. That not all people in our country have equal access to a path towards success. And we're going to have to correct that. For example, I propose that when it comes to families that are making less than $100,000 a year, so the family is making less than $100,000 a year, I'm proposing that we change our tax code to give those families up to a $6,000 tax credit that they can receive at $500 a month. So they can meet the cost of living, because there are those who will say that on the subject of the United States economy today, that it's great. It's great. Well, not so much. You know, you look at, they'll say, well, you'll ask, well, how are you measuring the greatness of the economy? And people will talk about the unemployment numbers. Well, I've been traveling our country. Yeah, people are working. They're working 2 and 3 jobs. Let's look at the fact about wages. Wages, for the most part, remain stagnant, while the cost of living, tuition, gas, housing keeps going up. We have to address these truths and do it in a way that recognizes that there is some course correction that needs to happen. So on the subject of renters, for example, I know this is a big issue here. The other proposal that I offer is that if a renter is paying more than 30% of their income in rent plus utilities, that they get a tax credit to be able to meet the cost of their rent. So that's the subject of the economy, and I'd like to have a longer and more in-depth conversation there. On the issue of education, let's speak some truths. We're a society that pretends to care about education, but not so much the education of other people's children. Let's be honest about that. Let's look at the fact that we have a public education system in our country that is not working for most of our children. And we're going to have to address that. We're going to have to address that in a way that recognizes, and again, I've been traveling the country. I've met teachers who are working 2 jobs, sometimes 3, to not only pay the bills, but because they are coming out of pocket on a consistent basis to pay for the tools for their children in their classroom to actually be educated, because we are not putting the resources into our public education system as we should. And I'll tell you, my personal connection to this is vast, including the fact that my first grade teacher, Mrs. Frances Wilson, God rest her soul, attended my law school graduation. It was a time in America where we were paying public teachers their value, understanding that in addition to parents, the people who are raising our children are our teachers, and we must give them the value of what they are giving us in return. Let's speak more truths. Climate change, it's real. It's real. And it is posing an existential threat to us as human beings. And we must not only take it seriously, we must have a sense of urgency about this. I was in Portsmouth yesterday. If you look at the rates and the tables in terms of the decline, because we are talking about decline, it within a relatively short period of time will be underwater. This is a real issue. When I first arrived at the United States Senate, I was, well, I'll tell you, right now I'm on several committees. I'm on the Senate Intelligence Committee. I'm on the Homeland Security Committee. I'm on Judiciary, and I'm on Budget. In addition, when I first got there, I was on Environment and Public Works. And so I sat in hearings where, I kid you not, one of the hearings we had, the premise of the hearing was essentially, should science be the basis of public policy? Now, further background about me, my sister and I were raised by a mother who had two goals in her life. My mother was a breast cancer researcher, and she had two goals in her life: to raise her two daughters and end breast cancer. She would take us to the lab with her. We'd go after school on weekends. I grew up around these people who their whole purpose for being was to use research and fact and science in a way that could improve human condition. And we right now are in a situation and have an administration who would have the American public buy science fiction instead of science fact. To our collective peril. To our collective peril. And you know, I joke about it on this issue. Look, I care about this issue not because I have any particular desire to hug a tree, but I have a very strong desire to hug a healthy baby. And when it comes down to it, this is a matter that includes whether or not we will have the ability to drink clean water and breathe clean air. Let's talk truths and facts. Let's look at where we are in terms of whether or not, and I know there are many leaders in business here, whether we are prepared for the needs of the workforce of the 21st century. Let's talk truth. Over the next 15 years, it is pretty widely accepted and agreed upon that over the next 15 years, up to 40% of the jobs that currently exist will no longer exist. We have to speak truth about this. We have to speak truth that automation is real. We have to speak truth that we are in the midst of an industrial revolution. We have to speak truth that we are not equipping the men and women of our country who are totally agree with part of who we are culturally, which is hard work is good work. But yet we as leaders are not preparing the workforce of America for the jobs of the 21st century. There's a list that came out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics mid-last year that projects the 20 jobs between 2016 and 2026 that will see the greatest amount of growth. I'm obsessed with this list. My staff will tell you she's about to start talking about that list. And yes, I am. So I'm going to now get into an interactive moment, if you'll give me just indulge me for a moment. So 20 jobs that will see the greatest amount of growth over the next 10 years, roughly. And I'll just take two guesses, Jim, okay? Okay. Guess what number 1 and number 2 on that list are? Any guesses? Raise your hand. I'll just take 2. I won't torture you. Yes? Software development. There are a lot that relate to technology, but not that. That's not number 1 and number 2. Yes, in the back. Ding, ding, ding. Okay. You know what? You're the first person that has ever guessed correctly. I kid you not. You're the first person. Yeah, so most people guess technology jobs, or they'll guess rightly because most of the jobs on the list relate to public health, right? Because we also have an aging population and we have so many unmet needs there. Number 1 and number 2, installation and maintenance of solar panels and wind turbine. So, right? Renewable energy. This is part of where we need to go. The reason those jobs are on that list is because we're talking also about a relationship where a job that needs to be performed and for which we don't have the skilled labor. How are we thinking about putting in place an infrastructure in our country to prepare our workforce in a way that has got to include, as part of the leadership of that conversation, the private sector? What jobs do you need performed? What are the skills required to perform that job? It has to include our educators. There's so many in this room. Are we, as government leaders, creating an environment in which that conversation is happening in an honest way? You know, and then including our labor leaders. Let me tell you something. I was talking with my friends in the building trades about this. They're like, Kamala, yeah. And let me just tell you something, they said. Everybody wants to talk about the new skills that are involved. That's good old-fashioned work that we have been doing in our apprenticeship programs forever. That's pipe fitting, electricians, welders, right? So the truths, I'm going to now end my issue spotting. There's so many truths that we must speak right now. And I will say this, I remain very optimistic about who we are, what we are capable of, and where we will go. I believe, and I know we all do, this is a room full of leaders, that we are a country that was founded on noble ideals. We were founded on the ideals that were behind and informed the writing of the Constitution of the United States and all of its amendments and the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence. The ideals that were behind those words in 1776, that we are all and should be treated as equals. Part of our strength as a nation is we are aspirational. We fight to achieve those ideals. We're also clear-eyed. We've never quite reached those ideals. But our strength is that we fight to reach those ideals. And this is a moment in particular where we must keep fighting, knowing that these are noble ideals, knowing that is part of our strength and purpose and just the nature of who we are. So I think of this as being an exciting moment in time, and I'm honored that you all have, from your busy lives and all of your commitments, chosen to spend this morning with me, and I'd love to take questions and hear from you.
So well done.
Thank you. Delayed it, right?
No, you didn't drop that line. We have a young lady, a young student here at St. A's, Haley Morgan, has a microphone, so if anyone wants to ask a question, she's down front. Just wait until she comes to your table to ask the question, and maybe you can identify yourself, too. So the senator can give you a real stern look, like, If I could ask the first question, Sen. Infrastructure is a big issue.
Yes.
President talked about it when he got
Yeah.
elected. This is going to be one of my priorities.
Yep.
The United States Congress, the United States Senate talks about infrastructure. We got to do something about the roads, the bridges, the highways, and we got to improve the economy. We got to get more jobs. But then when you get in the weeds, that's where you don't hear much in the sense of how do we pay for infrastructure in light of national debt just went up $2 trillion in the last 2 years. Now it's $22 trillion. Do you raise the gasoline tax? Do you revisit the tax cut that was passed by Congress and say, you know what, maybe we were too generous in the corporate, going down to 21. Maybe we should revisit, go back up to 25. Maybe we should revisit the personal income tax, the high end. Maybe it should have remained at 39 as opposed. How would you propose a funding mechanism for an infrastructure major piece of legislation?
Right. So the way I think of it is there are two pieces. There's no question that we need to repeal that tax bill that gave benefits to the largest corporations in the top 1%. They don't need it, and it is going to put another $1 trillion of burden on the American taxpayer and the American public. I also believe this, and I take my lead from my friends in the private sector who are so smart in the way they conduct their business. which is when asking about our effectiveness and efficiency and whether whatever the outlay is it worth it? There's a really simple analysis captured in 3 letters. ROI. What is the return on the investment? I think it's a mistake if we think only in terms of cost and overlook the investment component. If businesses overlooked investment and just concern themselves with cost, we would never see growth. We would never see innovation. And so when I look at an issue like infrastructure, America's infrastructure is about 150 years old. I don't need to tell New Hampshire that. And this is an issue that is not only about just infrastructure and disrepair. It's about the quality of people's lives and their productivity. It's literally, and this is a room of leaders, which we know that if you really want to be successful, you have to concern yourself with the details. Some would call them the mundane details of what's involved in any issue. When you've got roads and bridges where people, that half the time lanes are shut down because the potholes are so deep, or the person who's working and commuting and in their car for 2 hours, their car keeps breaking down because the tires keep deflating. This is a real issue. It's a real issue when they're spending 2 hours on that road because it is not efficient in the way it's been constructed, and that's time they're not spending at home doing homework with their children or having a family meal. So these are part of the cost of a failure to invest in infrastructure. Then let's talk about one of the biggest benefits for an investment in infrastructure, which is jobs. Those are jobs to build up our infrastructure. Those are good jobs. And so when I look at something like infrastructure, I think of it that way. And then let's go even further. Infrastructure, right now, classically, it usually was about roads and bridges. Well, the list doesn't end there anymore. It's also about what we need to do in many parts of the country around investing in renewable energies, around investing in the infrastructure around that, water. Let me tell you, right now, as far as I'm concerned, wars are being fought over oil. In a short time, they will be fought over water. We have got to have a priority around water policy in this country. Understanding that's going to require an investment in infrastructure around storage and capturing water. Then let's also think about other infrastructure, because on that word, I'll also bring up the issue of elections. Under the previous administration, the Secretary of Homeland Security designated elections as critical infrastructure of the United States. Now let's speak another truth. Russia interfered in the election of the President of the United States. A bill that I have, and it is because of the very nature of the issue, which is not just bipartisan, it is nonpartisan. A co-sponsor on it is a Republican from Oklahoma. His name is James Lankford. The bill came about because he and I were the only 2 United States senators to serve both on Homeland Security and Intelligence at the same time when we decided that we needed to do something. And so we have proposed that part of the investment in infrastructure has to be upgrading the infrastructure of states around elections. Because guess what? As it turns out, for all that technology has brought us, good and bad, the best and most secure way to conduct elections, paper ballots. Because the way that I say it, kind of half joking, Russia can't hack a piece of paper. We need to invest in that infrastructure also. And so that's another example of, again, investment. It will cost something, but the benefit will be our democracy. And so that's how I think about it.
We have a question from AARP. Mark.
Okay.
Senator, thank you for speaking of politics and eggs today
Thank you.
giving us a chance to know you better.
Thank you.
My name is Mark Boyd. I'm an AARP New Hampshire volunteer. Americans, as you know, Americans continue to pay the highest prescription prices, drug prices in the world.
Yep.
No one should have to choose between buying food and
That's
taking
right.
their medication.
That's right.
Do you agree drug prices are too high?
Yeah.
And if so, how specifically will you work to lower prescription drug prices and reduce costs for all America?
That's a great question, and I thank you for being a volunteer with AARP. I've done a lot of work over the years in partnership with AARP. So there are a number of points that I believe you're raising. One is the issue of prescription drug prices. And frankly, what has happened over the years is pharmaceutical companies have prioritized, in many cases, profit over public health. And so people are being charged exorbitant prices for critical medication, insulin being an example of that. And I can't tell you the number of people who I've met who are making choices about paying the rent or putting their money into the insulin they need to live. So there has to be greater, I believe, oversight over what is happening around pricing as it relates to drugs. And then that also includes oversight around generic drugs and what is either happening or not happening to encourage or discourage the manufacturing of generic drugs. Let's look at the opioid crisis. There is also the reality that there was a marketing of what we now know, and certainly New Hampshire knows, is a drug that has lethal consequences. Without an honest public information for the public about the consequences of its use. Because there was great profit, there was a great profit incentive there. And we are looking at the destruction of families as a result of that. And so again, that brings up the point about oversight around not only manufacturing and distribution and pricing, but also advertising and what needs to happen around advertising. Because specific to AARP, you know, one of the things I think about, first of all, and I say this as a former prosecutor, the war on drugs was an abject failure. We criminalized what is a public health matter. We spent, as it turns out, billions of dollars incarcerating what is otherwise a disease. And we are paying the price for that. Let's talk about the cost of that. Where we put this money into mass incarceration instead of public education. And to what end? So back to the opioid crisis in seniors. Part of what we're not talking about is we're looking at, and the mayor and I were discussing that this morning, we're looking at whole populations of seniors that are raising their grandchildren and great-grandchildren because the parent of those children is addicted. And on top of that, the irony is we also may be looking at that same senior who is experiencing health issues that create pain for which they're being prescribed opioids. And we are not treating the family as a whole, and the incentives around what they're getting and what they're not getting, I think, are a bit upside down. So I think of all of these issues, but in particular, there's got to be greater oversight. And there has to be, we have to, all of us speak the truth about this, about what is happening, what incentives are present, and what we should do to correct course. But this is a huge issue, obviously.
Bill Geary, but if we could just get the mic before you ask your question.
Thank you. Good morning, Senator. Recently, the nation suffered through the shutdown of the government.
Yeah.
An obscene attack
Yeah.
on our system of governance. What can be done by the Congress, and what would you do as president and during your remaining tenure as senator to prevent this from ever recurring, and the damage that it inflicts? And what triggered the question in my mind was when you talked about insulin.
Yeah.
And stories from
Right.
government employees
That's right.
who could not afford their insulin.
That's right.
So that is a national catastrophe that needs to be prevented in the future.
So I was raised by a mother who would not tolerate complaining. And so if you started complaining about something, she'd say, well, what do you plan on doing about it? So on the point that you just raised, I'm running for president of the United States. We cannot have leaders who put self-interest in front of the interest of other people. Public service is noble service when done right. But when the power that comes with these offices is used for the purpose of self-interest, when it is used in a way that it is an exercise of raw power, used in a way that is about beating people down and diminishing them and belittling them, we know we need a change. And that's why we have elections in this country. We need a change. We cannot continue to have an administration and a president of the United States who puts his vanity projects ahead of the needs of the people of our country. And let me just be more clear about that. I've been to the border. I prosecuted transnational criminal organizations. The idea that he is trying to say that we have people that are trying to invade our country to commit mass crime is a crisis of his own making. You talk with the people who take an oath to protect our border, and they will tell you the trafficking that is happening of drugs and guns coming into our country, it's happening at ports of entry. We don't need a multi-billion-dollar wall. That wall ain't gonna stop them. We need resources at our ports of entry. And of course, we need to have border security. But this is a crisis of his own making because it was a campaign pledge that took heat and propelled him to victory. And he feels the need to keep reciting what is a lie. And I'm going to go on with this for just a minute more, if you'll indulge me. I met those workers that you're talking about, federal workers. I mean, we're talking about people that range from air traffic controllers to people who work at Department of Homeland Security, right? Who take an oath to concern themselves with our safety. And they went for a month without getting paid. Not to mention the critical services that were diminished. One of the things, guys, remember, that I think, I don't know for sure, but I think, turned the corner was when the air traffic controllers sent a letter saying, we're really concerned because we are barely sleeping at night. Essentially, that's what they were saying. And then there were a group of people that said, the last thing you want is for there to be a crash, so you better figure this stuff out. Why would it have to come to that? For the commander-in-chief to figure out that he is abusing his powers and he's got to stop. So,
I'm told that we have like 5 minutes, so we're going to do a couple of questions quick. Tess?
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I'm Tess Kinning. I work for the community health centers both in Vermont and New Hampshire, and I really appreciate your support for the health centers as well as working families and those vulnerable and giving dignity and safety to those. So I'm going to lean into a question about those other 15 that are likely on the list in terms of healthcare and public health.
Sure.
And ask you a two-part question about what would you do to think about the infrastructure of supporting more primary and prevention care in public health.
Yeah.
And then that's the access side of it, but then also what would you do about the coverage side of it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll take the second part first, which is I am a proponent of Medicare for all. And I believe that we have got to change the reimbursement system that we have because it is actually not creating incentives for mental health and for mental health care, for community health care to exist, much less thrive in the communities that most need them. We have complete deserts in our country, areas where there is no treatment facility or treatment providers available, and those happen to also be some of the areas with the highest need. I believe that part of the restructuring of the system should be this. I believe we should have mental health care on demand, substance abuse treatment on demand. And by that I mean that like you can go into an emergency room, you should be able to go into a treatment facility and get mental health care and substance abuse treatment on demand. And I'm going to get into more detail about that. We also need to have national standards around what is viable and appropriate treatment and not, particularly as it relates to drug treatment, because we don't have national standards right now. And so we also have a situation where people are setting up tents around drug treatment facilities and residential drug treatment facilities, and they're not receiving the kind of supervision that should happen around whether it is actually meaningful and helpful for the people who are often paying out of pocket to do that. The other piece of it is that we need incentives at a federal level for people to actually go into these professions, because we have a dearth of professionals, especially in those areas most in need, and a large part of it is because of the reimbursement system that we have. So in areas where there are a lot of people that can afford to pay for the treatment, you see a lot of those professionals. And in areas, in particular rural areas of our country, you don't see any. Another, I think, issue, or benefit that we have at our disposal, which we need to encourage, is telemedicine. This is one of those areas where technology can actually really help improve a system of service delivery. There's some great models of how it works, and we need to create incentives for more of that. But community mental health is a very real issue. Part of our failing is in the public health sector is we have overlooked the significance also of trauma, and we have not done a sufficient amount of work in diagnosis and treatment of trauma, which leads to not only, obviously, mental health outcomes, but also physical health. And so I could talk more extensively about that. But as a general matter, we have to elevate the discussion.
Do you have your hand up? One final question.
Hi. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I'll keep it brief because I know we're at the end here. I would like to know if you would support laws that provide community services to people living with disabilities or seniors so that they can have in-home services and they can continue to contribute to their community, be in their home where they're best off, and instead of expensive institutions.
Absolutely.
And we have like the biggest aging populations in these few states around here. So we're going to be confronted with this very heavily. My mother-in-law just passed away at the end of October, and we were sent home with almost no services. And it was, it was pretty scary. So we need, I think, and I think it comes under the title of the Disability Integration Act that supports people with disabilities under health care.
The short answer is yes. And there's a lot of work to be done. And again, around public policy, this is a moment where we have to also recognize that so much of our public policy was based on a lifespan that is much shorter than the lifespan of Americans today. And so what we're doing in those years that are between 65 and 100, literally, we need to really critically evaluate because we're not doing enough. So, yes. Yes, absolutely. I would agree to in-home services as a priority. Yes.
Well, we want to thank the Senate. My only question was, did you watch the Super Bowl?
So, let me just...
Just curious,
You're supposed to be just like, I'm a guest in your home right now.
Curious. Okay, moving right along.
Just keep going.
Let me also just acknowledge the presence of Ray Buckley, who's the chair of the New Hampshire Democratic Committee, right down front. And he's been very, very, very helpful in securing all of these premier candidates to stop by the Politics and Eggs. So thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Ray.
And we would just like to present a Politics and Eggs tote bag.
Yay.
And
There you go.
because you're going to be spending a lot of time up here, and
Yes.
maybe you could just
Yes.
use it
This is good.
wisely.
I feel right at home.
Great. And we really appreciate you stopping by. We know you have a very busy day, to say the least, but you found time to come to Politics and Eggs. And you did a great job, and we want to thank you for giving New England Council a treat and Politics and Eggs a treat to hear your remarks. Thanks very much, Senator. All right.
Thank you all. Thank you.
You're gonna
Thank you, Mom. This was a real treat for me.
Thank you, thank you.
So I'm actually just asking what our director.
Oh, so it's wonderful to get this. Thank you. Thanks for your work. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Can I grab a picture? Yes, of course. The Alzheimer's Association. Thank you so much. Hi. Thank you so much. The healthcare issues.
Thank you.
Medicare and Social Security.
It's such a big issue. And we've just significance of it for decades, and we're paying the price for it.
I love affordable care, but it's not gone far enough.
Yeah, no. And around the things like if you deal with mental health,
I don't know mental health.
it leads to everything else.
It's definitely true, and substance abuse.
Right. Thank you for your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator, can a Canadian reporter ask you a question? You're probably the only candidate who grew up in a country with Medicare for all. You never talk about Canada. The word Canada's not in your book. The word Quebec's not in your book. You were in high school through the referendum campaign. Did that have any effect? I mean, that was the ultimate identity politics.
Well, not the ultimate, but it was
pretty close.
It was a very significant.
That was your junior year
yeah.
in high school.
Yeah, no, and it was actually a real, it was a very significant movement, and it was about the people wanting to know that they're going to receive equal treatment and respect and dignity for their culture and the circumstances of their existence in their country, and it was a very powerful movement. There's no question.
Were you a we or a no?
Thanks, guys. We got to
Did you take a side?
I was too young to vote. Yeah.
Well, you weren't a citizen, I assume.
And that is for my coworker. Thanks, guys. Thank you guys so much. Here, I'll give you these two. Oh, here. Here, we'll get you the. Well, I'll get the sign. I'll get them signed for you. I won't forget. Thanks, guys.
Lily, nothing?